Guided tour. Sitting next to me was a freckle-faced boy named Jacob. He jabbered a lot, at first about his family and their business. His father, he told me, was an apple dealer and was often traveling. He would buy up orchards in the spring when the flowers were on the trees. Then, as the apples ripened, Jacob and his sisters would pick and pack them. Our apples are shipped all over Germany, he told me proudly. My father died of influenza when I was a baby, I told Jacob. I'm an only child, and I live with my mother and her parents, my grandparents, in an apartment above our restaurant in Wilsberg. Jacob looked at me expectantly, as though I had more to tell, but there was really nothing of interest to say, and talking about my family only made me more homesick, especially for my mother. When she had seen me off at the train station in Nuremberg that morning, she had looked shrunken and shriveled and wore dark clothes, like a mourner at a funeral. Mine. Jacob plucked an undersized booklet from the breast pocket of his jacket. In its pages, filled with maps and tourist information, he seemed to find a refuge from reality. Shortly, he began reading aloud from it as we traveled eastward across Germany and into Czechoslovakia. The train slowed as it passed through Prague. Prague is the capital of Czechoslovakia, he told me. We have now traveled 120 kilometers east from Nuremberg. As he rattled on about the history and wonders of Prague, I looked out and saw a dreary city that had become a supply depot and garrison for our troops. I wished my self-appointed tour guide would be quiet. I didn't feel well. The train had become increasingly hot and stuffy. My face was wet with perspiration, and my uniform clung damply to my body. My head ached, and the stench coming from the open toilet, only a few steps behind where I sat, was making me nauseous. At the moment, the history of Prague held very little interest for me. Perhaps an hour and a half later, the train again slowed as it clacked through Krakow, Poland. Our bombing raids had gutted the whole sections of the city. We passed one long street on which a blackened body hung from almost every streetlight. Partisans, I heard someone say. Jacob, the tour guide, was too immersed in his booklet to see the horrid sight. At the center of Krakow is what is known as the Old City, he droned on, a fortress which hung during the 13th century, was moated and walled. He glanced out the window for a moment, then returned his attention to his book. Next we should be passing Tarnow, Poland. He shrugged rounded shoulders. But after that, well, it is anyone's guess. Not even my tour guide knew exactly where we were headed. Our commanders had kept us in the dark about our destination, so we simply sat, bored and scared, as the train raced across Poland toward the war. As I have said, most of the 40 or so soldiers in the car like me were new conscripts. We did not know each other, nor had we even trained together. Other than target practice in the Jugend, there had only been 3 short weeks of actual military training. During this time, I learned how to march, salute, how to say yes, sir, and no, sir, and how not to question orders. Because ammunition was in short supply, I was taught how to assemble, load, and clean a Mauser rifle, but only rarely was I allowed to fire one. I tossed practice grenades at wooden cutouts of soldiers. That, then, was the extent of my preparation for war, as it was for the other boys on the train. There was also a handful of veterans on the train, many of whom had been wounded, treated, and were now being sent back to battle. Most just sat quietly, grim expressions on their faces, but one, a man of about 30 or so, kept wandering around the car. When Jacob got up and made his way to the curtained-off alcove, the toilet, the veteran decided to take his seat. He picked up the boy's pack and began going through it. When Jacob returned, it was to find the veteran enjoying a sandwich he had found in the pack. "This is quite good," said the veteran. "Did your mama make it for you?" Stunned, my freckle-faced tour guide didn't know what to say. Across the aisle, I saw other boys looking on, their expressions both curious and apprehensive. The veteran eating the sandwich was not an especially big man, but there was something terribly frightening about him, something murderous, and there was no question that he would have his way. He tossed Jacob his pack and rifle. Red-faced, humiliated, Jacob made his way down the aisle in search of a place to sit. Pickles and knockwurst. That is what was in the sandwich the man was eating. He kept his eyes on me as he ate, sending chills down my spine. When he was done, he wiped his hands on my shirt as though it was quite a natural thing to do. I lost these at Stalingrad. He held up his left hand. The last 3 fingers were missing. Now they are sending me back to Russia. I don't think that's fair, do you? No, I replied, keeping my voice as steady as I could. It is not just because of my fingers that I should not be sent back. It is because a man can endure only so much. The bombing, the artillery, especially the artillery. For a long moment he lapsed into silence. Perhaps they are sending me back because they know I will not die, because I have the power, the strength. I can take care of myself. He looked me squarely in the eye. Do you sense my power, boy? Yes. He nodded, grinning with satisfaction. You are going to love Russia. He launched into a litany of horror stories. The worst was about partisans, men, women, and children who fought us in small roving bands and who had sabotaged a troop train like ours on the way to the front. There were bodies and parts of bodies everywhere, he told me with seeming glee. Mostly they were just kinder, stupid children like you. Never even got a chance to fire their rifles. With that, he got up, belched, and wandered off, probably in search of others to torment, leaving me scared to death and sure our train would blow up at any moment. A while later, Jacob returned to his seat beside me. His booklet was in his pocket. He sat rigidly in silence, staring out the window as foreign landscape flashed by. Much of it was serene, pretty, but then Jacob pointed, horror in his eyes. I turned in time to see a church that had been set up as a temporary hospital. A wooden cart was headed away from the place, in the direction of a deep trench. It was being pulled by men, not horses, and it was filled to overflowing with corpses.